Another question was lifting, doing tempo sets versus lifting as explosively as possible. There are a lot of pros and cons there. And with tempo lifting, I only use that for beginners, essentially, because when you slow everything down, you are trying to emphasize technique most of the time. And you're trying to, just for instance, a squat, you're going to go down at a certain rate, which is slow and controlled. And the biggest thing is trying to hold posture and trying to keep your knees in the right place, keep everything balanced, and you're practicing technique. As far as strength adaptations, if you are a beginner, you're certainly going to get them. Intermediate, maybe. If you're really advanced, and especially if you're not using enhancing supplements, it's not going to be that great of a benefit to you, because when you are already past that point of learning the technique and refining it, and you have good technique, you don't necessarily need to practice it that exclusively anymore unless you have mobility issues. There are ways to work around that and emphasize it in your training. But the big thing is when you lift intentionally slowly, you have muscle fiber adaptations that are very different from the way it should be if you're trying to become as explosive or as powerful or as strong as possible. If you ever look at a biopsy slide of muscle tissue, you can look this up on Google, it's pretty easy to find. When you see a cluster of muscle fibers, on a slide, a type 1 muscle fiber might be about this big, not too big. And a type 2A muscle fiber, which is not the most powerful, but it's significantly more powerful than a type 1, which is endurance oriented, and it's oxidative, so it has mitochondria in it. A type 2A muscle fiber is going to get about this big. And from there, you start having hybrids between 2A and 2X, and they can range in size, but if you really want to focus on strength, in general, you have to develop 2X fibers as much as possible. And that only comes when you lift with as much intent as you possibly can. And those eventually grow, significantly larger than the 2As. And the reason that is there is a neural threshold. When an electrical signal is sent into the muscle, if you have a low electrical signal or neural signal, it's only going to activate a few motor units, just enough to get the job done. And if you start lifting with more intent or lifting a heavier weight, then you're going to increase the number of motor units that you're bringing into play and activating, and those are going to start being on a graded scale. Low motor unit activation, endurance fibers, just like walking and things like that. If you start trying to run or jog, you're going to start incorporating a few more, especially if you're out of shape like me and can't run anywhere. But you're going to start activating more of those 2A type fibers. And when you start activating all the motor units with an all-out effort, lifting explosively and moving as forcefully as possible, that is when you start catching the threshold and meeting the requirement to activate those 2X fibers. And if you do that consistently and often enough, those 2X fibers start proliferating and get more and more and more and more of them. And that's how you really become strong and powerful without gaining significant size. If you're in weight class sports, that's super, super important. So you might want to be careful if you're doing too much tempo stuff and you're in a weight class sport particularly.